Shalom. My name is Yair Davidiy. I'm speaking to you from the land of Israel. I represent Brit-Am, a movement that researches the whereabouts of the lost 10 tribes, and we have found them. We have found the lost 10 tribes amongst Western nations, and we research this. This is what we do, research where the lost 10 tribes are. We prove that they are amongst Western peoples. We have proven it from biblical, rabbinical, archaeological, linguistic, mythological sources, and from numerous other fields of inquiry. Anything which is in any way pertinent to the subject, we have studied it, gone into it, and brought proofs from it, and shown how all the proofs from all the different directions all interlock with each other, all establish this fact that lost in tribes amongst Western peoples. And this is what we do: we research the subject, we establish the proofs, we confirm the proofs, we add to the proofs, and we propagate this knowledge. We also work towards the ultimate reconciliation between the lost 10 tribes, that is, peoples amongst Western nations, and Judah, that is the present-day Jewish people, that is the present-day Jewish people, whom we find in the land of Israel and also in the Jewish diaspora. They are the Jews are Judah, and we have talks about this, proofs about this. We research it is important. And amongst other things, we also fight against anti-Jewish prejudice, because this interferes. First of all, it is because this is evil, something which, an evil must be resisted, evil must be fought against. And when evil spreads lies, and people are misled, in some cases by these lies, by these mistruths, we have to present the truth as we know it to be, in order that those who are vulnerable to be misled and have something to counter the falsehoods with. Now, our experience shows that there are people who will always be pro-Jewish no matter what. There are others who will always be against the Jews no matter what. And there are those in between who can sway either way according to their moods, according to the weather, according to what is happening to them, according to what they have read on the news, according to 101 different things. And one of the things that can sway them is information or misinformation. And so we work towards providing the correct information. This is not something that we emphasize ourselves as doing. Our main task is to show the lost in tribes amongst Western peoples, and that is what we do. Incidentally, here and there, we also counter anti-Israeli claims, also anti-Jewish claims, and we do this because this is something good that needs to be done, and also because it is somehow it is part of our mission of bringing the news concerning the lost in tribes, both to the Jews of Judah and to the lost 10 tribes themselves, who are peoples amongst Western nations. So one of the claims, or one of the miscomprehensions connecting with the Jewish people is the idea that the Jews are communists, or that the Jews caused the Russian Revolution and the spread of communism. And there were a lot of Jews in the early days of the communist movement in the communist ranks, but they were not the majority of the Jewish people, and their explanations as to what they did and their influence has been exaggerated. They weren't there for that long, but they were there. People who have dark motivations, people who are not of good character, sometimes present the Jews in the wrong way as having caused communism to spread. So it's worthwhile knowing exactly what did happen, so that we may be able to look at everything in the correct perspective. And this is what this article, this is what this short talk is about to do, to some degree. The communist revolution, the Russian Revolution in 1917, took place towards the end of the First World War. It resulted in the communists taking over Russia, and from that we had the spread of communism throughout the world until just before the implosion of the Soviet Union in 1991. The change in Russian attitude from about 1986 onwards until its implosion in 1991. But they still exist. The communists are still there. They're not as virulent as they used to be. But they're still around and they still have influence. And the results of what they did are still with us. At all events, 1917 was the time when the Russian Revolution took place. 1917 was the time when the Russian Revolution took place. The Russian Revolution took place in Russia. So this is important because the situation in Russia was very bad. Most of the people were peasants, and there were small groups of industrial workers in the cities. The cities is where the Industrial Revolution took place, so the cities and the proletariat in the cities had a much greater importance than their relative numbers would lead us to expect. But all events, the situation regarding the whole of the people was bad. Most of the people were illiterate, they were mistreated, they were superstitious, they were exploited, they had aristocrats ruling over them. And they also had the Tsar, who was the king of Russia, the emperor of Russia, the Tsar, and he too was not as good as he should have been. And attempts had been made to improve, for reforms, to help to improve the lot of the common people, and to bring progress in its train. And things may have been getting better. Perhaps things could have improved gradually. Perhaps not. At all events, the people were oppressed. They felt oppressed. They felt mistreated. And so there was agitation, propaganda against the existing regime was spread. And there was the Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution took place and the Tsar was deposed. And at the beginning, the communists were not the rulers. A group of socialist democrats, relatively liberal people of slight moderate socialist inclinations were in control at first. They had a coalition of which the communists, or the Bolsheviks as they were then known, was a part. And they were the rulers at the beginning, and they continued the war against Germany. It was in the middle of the First World War, and they attempted to institute reforms. But it wasn't easy, and there were problems, and there was a struggle. The ruler at the beginning was someone called Kerensky, who according to reports was half Jewish, and he himself was in favour of a liberal type of regime, a liberal type of government, to change things in a moderate sense, one could say. And most Jews, the majority of the Jewish population, according to his own testimony, were supporters of Kerensky. Nevertheless, the Bolsheviks, the communists, the extreme communists were also present, and they had a struggle, and they managed to take over. They managed to take control. And how did they take control? Because there were people of ability in their ranks. These included Trotsky, who was a Jewish, who was a revolutionary. They also included Lenin, who was not Jewish. Lenin had been in exile. He'd been in Switzerland. He came from Russia, but he'd been exiled. He'd been exiled from the country, and he'd gone to Switzerland. And the Germans took Lenin. They gave him a chest full of gold pieces, like billions of dollars in terms of our currency. They put him on a sealed train that he wouldn't have any contact with the masses, and that people would not know of what was going on, and they sent him to the Russian front with this gold. And he came there, and he came to Russia, and with using the gold and using his influence and his abilities, he, together with Trotsky, together with others, managed to take over the Russian government. So that was the first stage. The Bolsheviks took control. Also in 1917, Lenin became the head of the government. Lenin was the ruler, the effective ruler of Russia after that. He made peace with Germany, which is why the Germans had sent him there in the first place. They made the peace known as Brest-Litovsk. That is the name of the agreement they made with Germany. And this peace treaty was very favourable towards the Germans. It gave them virtual control of all of the Ukraine. The breadbasket that gave them a lot of territory and economical rights within Russia. In the fact that Brest-Litovsk gave them to Germany at that time a lot of the advantages that Hitler later tried to achieve by invading Russia. The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk would have given Germany all of that, or most of it. It would have made Germany a very powerful country if it had have continued. But Russia was only one of the enemies of Germany at that time. The Germans were not long afterwards defeated in the West. The Germans were in a very poor state of affairs. They didn't have time. 2 million Germans had already died of starvation. And the Germans felt themselves obliged to make peace with the Allies in the West. Later the Germans would claim that the Jews had forced them to do this, and that they had been stabbed in the back, and this was not so. It was the German rulers, Hindenburg and Ludendorff, it was the German generals, Ludendorff and Hindenburg, who prevailed upon the Kaiser of Germany to make peace with the Allies, and peace was made, and therefore the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Russia in the east was fell into obeisance. It was as if to say annulled in a de facto sense. But in Russia at this time things were not so easy. It was not a settled situation. It should also be mentioned concerning the Jews. What was the situation with the Jews? The Jews in Russia had been persecuted for a long period of time by the Tsar and by the predecessors of the Tsar. At one stage in the 1800s, every Jewish child from the age of 8 or 12, up until the age of 30, was taken away from his parents and forced to serve in the Russian army. And in the Russian army, a lot of them were forced to become Christians, and a lot of and treated very badly, and forced to desecrate the Sabbath and to eat meat which was not kosher, and a lot of very serious offences were committed against the Jews. Also, the Tsar himself had a German wife, and the Tsar himself was influenced by anti-Jewish propaganda, and he condoned, or not only did he condone, but he also actively supported pogroms, physical attacks against the Jewish people, and many Jews were killed or raped or molested or hurt, and this happened periodically. The Tsar was in effect waging war against the Jewish population. Tsar was waging war against the Jewish population, and there was a climate of anti-Jewish prejudice throughout Europe, as if to say that all the anti-Semites of the world especially of Western Europe and Eastern Europe, had gotten together, and they had a de facto agreement amongst themselves that the Jews would have to be exterminated. This is before Hitler. And we're not saying that this is some type of conspiracy where people sit around the table and make agreements and write down a protocol. Though this did happen. This did happen in certain stages, but more important than this is a de facto understanding that people of like mind reach with each other, a consensus of opinion and an instinctive urge and a drive, a mutual sentiment that prevailed that the Jews would have to be eliminated. And Hitler came along and he picked up this current of thought. He was influenced by it, he gave expression to it, and he carried through the Holocaust. But it was not only in Germany, it was also in Russia. And it prevailed amongst the Russian upper classes, also the Russian lower classes throughout Russia. It was to be found, especially amongst the religious people and the right-wing reactionaries, but also amongst other peoples within Russia, and also in the Russian secret service. The Russians had secret agents that were very active throughout Russia. The whole of Russia was riddled with secret agents, and even the revolutionary movements had people from the Russian secret service in their ranks. In fact, a good portion of the Russian revolutionaries had been serving in the Russian Secret Service. When they took control of Russia after the Russian Revolution, one of the first things they did was to seize all the records and to destroy them, that there should not be any evidence of their complicity in the Russian Secret Service as it had been. And this Russian Secret Service, together with the Prussian Secret Service, we should remember that Germany, even the German Empire, had only existed as we know it from 1871. Before it had been created by the King of Prussia, becoming the Kaiser of all of Germany. Prussia was the major state within Germany. The Prussians were a powerful people. The Prussian Secret Service and the Russian Secret Service, they together, or one after the other, they took various works of fiction, various anti-Semitic inventions, fantasies that different people had written, and they put them together, and they came up eventually what is known as the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. These protocols, there are different versions of them, but they pretend to be the records, the minutes of a meeting in Prague or somewhere else, different versions, but anyway, the elders of the Jews get together and they decide that they will support revolutions throughout the world. They will support reform movements, progressive movements, and today we would call them left-wing trends of thought throughout the world, and they would bring about revolutions, and they would lead to the corruption of the Gentile peoples and to the undermining of religion and of the establishment and so on. It would weaken the Gentiles in order that they should be able to take control of the world and get all their money for themselves. This might sound fantastic, but this is what people believed, and they still believe it. They still believe it, and they preach it and propagate it. And these protocols were considered to be genuine by a lot of people. And today they are favourite reading amongst Arabs, amongst Arabs intellectuals. Also in Japan they like them. Also in Latin America, amongst right-wing peoples everywhere. The protocols are still a favourite topic. The Tsar himself recognised the protocols as being a forgery, and he thought it was beneath the dignity of Russia to give support to them, to recognise them. So he himself dissociated himself from them, but his Secret Service did not. His Secret Service worked to spread them, to spread these lies. And for a time they were believed. Even in England, at one stage the Times picked them up, reported them as if there was something to them, and they retracted. And investigative reporters for the Times did a study of the subject and proved them to be forgeries and showed where they had originated from and how they had been put together by people who hated the Jews and had a bloodlust for Jewish blood. But at all events they existed, and they were part of the Russian propaganda machine, and the Russian establishment had been anti-Semitic and had conducted pogroms against the Jews before the time of the revolution, and they had wanted to depict the revolutionaries as Jews or controlled by Jews in order to discourage people from following them, because a good portion of the population disliked the Jews or suspected the Jews were not as good as they should be and were prepared to believe all kinds of fantastic stories about them. People were also, many of them were illiterate or semi-illiterate, superstitious, and they did not know that much. So in some cases they were easily misled. So we have this element of Russian anti-Semitism and the protocols of the Elders of Zion being spread by reactionary forces, and we have the Russian Revolution. After the Russian Revolution, the Tsar had been deposed, and replaced, but he and his family were later assassinated, but his followers still existed, or not so much his followers, those who believed in the old order of things, that aristocrats should still rule, that the revolutionaries should not be allowed to have a say in government, that the common people should not have equal rights with the aristocratic and the reactionary groupings. And not only that, there's another point, that these forces, these reactionary forces known as the White Russians, in history, they're not, these White Russians may also have had a hand in the revolution that overthrew the Tsar. Some of them had to come to the conclusion that the Tsar was in the way. He was in the way of getting to where they wanted to be, and he had to be taken away. He had to be eliminated. So they too, and some of the revolutionaries were under the control, in the pay of the White Russian Secret Service. So things get complicated, but these matters are worth keeping in mind, but putting them to the side whilst we follow the mainstream of affairs as it occurred. So we had these White Russians, reactionaries and others who were against the revolution, and they were a large number of people, and they had the support of Cossacks, of the Ukrainian nationalists, of all kinds of people who lived in Russia, but were not necessarily Russians, Baltic peoples, people of Germanic descent in Russia, and the aristocrats who considered themselves to be racially not really Russian, and they were not recognized by a good portion of the people as being part of Russia. They were in fact foreigners, and they tried to distract attention from their foreign antecedents and their own foreign attitudes towards the Russian people by blaming the Jews, who were also not entirely Russian, not considered that Russian, not native Russians. And they waged a war against the communists, against the Bolshevik forces, and they had help. They had help from numerous governments. Numerous governments sent contingents of troops to help the White Russians. And there were people from all over the place. Foreign troops came from France, they came from Czechoslovakia, they came from Britain, from Romania, from Greece, from the USA, from Estonia, Italy, China. There were even a small group of specialist soldiers from Australia, and from Canada, and from Japan. They were all there, and they were all helping the White Russians attempt to defeat and drive the Russian Bolsheviks out. And they were important. These foreign troops were important, but the war dragged on, and the foreign troops saw that the White Russians themselves were not really were not so worthy of being assisted, that they were committing atrocities against Jews, against Russians, native Russians. They were killed. Hundreds of thousands of Gentile native Russians were killed by the White Russians. Also 70,000 to 100,000 Jews were killed by attacks from the White Russian forces. The native Russians associated the White Russians with the Tsar, with the former aristocratic rulers, and did not want them, did not consider them part of Russia. They did not have public support, and eventually they were defeated. This whole struggle between the Red Russians and the White Russians continued up until 1920 in southern Russia, and other parts of Russia in Siberia went on to 1922. Elsewhere it continued, in other parts of Russia it continued further than that. And but eventually the Bolsheviks did take over. At first, a good portion of the Bolshevik leaders were Jews. They were Jews because the Jews were literate, the Jews were intellectual, the Jews were considered by the native Russians to be more truly Russians than the White Russians, at the least, and the Jews could do the job. And the Jews also believed. The Jews have this messianic complex. One could say that they want to reform the world, they want to do good, and the idea of communism had come along, and many of them had become communists. They were a minority amongst the Jewish people, but they were there, and they were suited to control, to rule and direct matters, and so they were chosen for leading tasks in the early Russian government. It should also be remembered that Karl Marx himself was Jewish, and he had written the Communist Manifesto together with Friedrich Engels, who was also Jews. They were both Jews from Germany, and they had written these communist tracts, these communist ideological formulations that the early communists treated as having significance, as being works of reference, and attached great importance to. But nevertheless, they were not really the first to formulate, to say what they said. Others had been there before them. They repeated or reiterated widely held beliefs in the early socialist movements in Russia and in Europe in general. And if they had not have done what they did, if they had not written what they did, others would have written something similar, or what had already been written by others would have been used in its stead. Also, it should be remembered that Karl Marx himself was brought up as a Christian. He disliked Jews, he was anti-Jewish, he wrote against the Jews, he wrote criticisms and anti-Semitic slurs against the Jews. He was influenced by the Prussian prejudice against Jews, but racially or through his ancestry he was Jewish. So this too, in the light of what happened, also was of importance. And as we said at the very beginning of the Russian Revolution, of the Russian revolutionary Bolshevik rule in Russia, a good portion of the leading administrators were Jewish, but they didn't last long. They lasted a couple of years, and that's all. As soon as, from the Russian ranks of the native Russians, they grew up, they developed a class of people who were literate, who were educated, who could do the job. They replaced the Jews. And it wasn't long before Stalin, Joseph Stalin, who was Osset, from the Caucasus Mountains of Osset ancestry from Georgia. He came from Georgia, but his father was actually Osset. Osseti was actually Osset, which is a different group within Georgia. And he took control of Russia, and he became a dictator. Stalin more or less took over from 1924 onwards. Stalin was anti-Jewish. He was against the Jews. He administrated measures against Jewish life. He initiated measures against Jewish existence in the cultural and religious sense, also in the physical sense even. Towards the end of his life, for his death in 1953, Stalin had actually accused the Jews of being behind what is called the Doctors' Plot, a plot by leading doctors who were Jewish to poison leading Russian functionaries and to take control of Russia. And he had measures, or a whole program had been worked out, or by Stalin or by people around Stalin, it's not certain, but plans had been drawn up and measures had been almost put into place to exile all of the Jews to Siberia, to cause pogroms and uprisings in Russia itself. When news of the so-called plot by Jewish doctors to poison leading Russians would have been given out and propagated, and the masses had been stirred up to start attacking Jews, then the idea apparently was to take all of the Jewish people, to say it was for their own protection, and to exile them to Siberia. And in Siberia they had already established townships and camps in which the Jews would be placed. And these places where the Jews were to be placed in were huts, open-air huts, and so on, in subhuman conditions, and this would have led to the physical extermination of a good portion of the Jews. Stalin died just before this program could be put into place. It's worth remembering that Stalin himself had anti-Semitic designs to destroy the Jewish people. And the communists had attempted to destroy the Jewish people in the spiritual sense. Now, we mentioned that after 1917, 1918, when the Bolsheviks took control, a good portion of the leading Bolsheviks, communist rulers were Jewish. As they set up what is known as the Yevsekia, a Jewish ministry, one could say, to deal with Jewish matters. The purpose of this ministry, of this apparatus that was established, was to uproot Jewish belief. They were to promote Marxism, secularism, that is non-religious thought, and to encourage Jewish assimilation into Soviet society, to bring communism to the Jewish masses, to destroy Zionism alongside traditional Jewish culture. Religious traditions, I'm now reading from a Wikipedia article. It says that religious traditions amongst the Jewish population were suppressed. In August 1919, Jewish properties, including synagogues, were seized and many Jewish communities were dissolved. This type of persecution continued into the 1920s. We also have another article, Jewish Europe Between the Wars, where it tells us that these Jewish communists were incredibly ruthless. They were cruel people. They did not believe in Judaism. They were atheists. And many of them, even though they were of Jewish ancestry, had not been brought up as Jewish. They're the same as the Gentiles, and even worse. They hated their own people. And they were incredibly ruthless in stamping out any type of religious activities by fellow Jews. They killed rabbis. They put rabbis to death. They closed the yeshivos, the Jewish study halls, and educational institutions, and they closed the synagogues. They banned all religious practices. Even circumcision was forbidden, and keeping the Sabbath was almost impossible. And they did things to wipe out Jewish religion, and they almost succeeded, because the Jews of Russia, in a very short period of time, had forgotten in many cases that they were Jewish, or they intermarried with non-Jews. They had forgotten what Judaism was. It says they killed rabbis, they closed the yeshivos and synagogues, they banned all religious practices, and they enforced it by getting friends to turn in neighbours, children to turn in parents. They encouraged children to inform on their parents. So we go to the schools and indoctrinate the children, brainwash them, and encourage the children to tell them if their parents were keeping any aspects of the Jewish religion, and if they were, they would send them to Siberia for observing the religion. It was the Yevsekia more than anything else that destroyed the Jewish community in Russia. So there we have it, that even though the Jews were predominant for a short period of time after the Russian Revolution, it is only a superficial predominance. It didn't last very long, and they were soon replaced, and at all events they were not really Jewish in the sense that they did not feel Jewish. They felt anti-Jewish and acted in an anti-Jewish way, and they became the enemies of the Jewish people. The Russian communist prejudice and oppression of the Jews and of the Jewish religion continued until the end of the communist regime. Here and there was mitigated, here and there was modified, but on the whole it continued all the time. And one of the factors that led to its end, that led to the freeing of the Jews, was the presidency of Ronald Reagan. The presidency of Ronald Reagan and the policies of President Reagan led to the freeing of the Jews of Russia and also of Ethiopia. The Jews in Ethiopia were in danger of extermination. They were in camps in the Sudan, and Ronald Reagan gave instructions for the U.S. Air Force and U.S. agencies to assist the state of Israel to bring the Jews of Ethiopia to the state of Israel. Ronald Reagan did that. Ronald Reagan was descended from Irish kings. He was of royal blood, of royal Irish blood. And he represented the forces of Joseph helping Judah free herself from the shackles of oppression, free herself to fulfill her religion, And we should mention that Ronald Reagan, when he spoke about the Jews, and he spoke about the Jewish need to be freed and to be allowed to go to Israel, he also repeatedly emphasized the need for the Jews to be allowed to practice their religion, to be free to practice their religion. This is very, very important in the spoken statements of Reagan and in understanding his psychology. He represented the forces of Joseph, and the beginnings of the reunification of Joseph and Judah, and he was instrumental in this. His policies and his pressures enabled the Jews to be freed from 1986 onwards until the implosion of the Soviet Union in 1991. Ronald Reagan was president until 1989, and all that time the Jews, through his pressures, his constant pressures, were unable to go to Israel, and this was a major factor in his policies, in his attitude. The Russians needed US assistance, they needed US tolerance and abilities and input, and the condition that Reagan laid down before all the discussions, before all debates, was the freedom of the Jews, the allowing of the Jews to go to Israel and to be unable to keep their religious faith. We should also mention that we have the testimony of Jonathan David White, the son of Rabbi Julian White, who had a personal audience with Ronald Reagan whilst Ronald Reagan was president, and in that audience Ronald Reagan affirmed his belief that he was descendant from the seed of Israel, and that the seed of Israel had come to Ireland and established the kingdom, the rulership of his lineage there. Thank you. May the Lord God of Israel bless you.